Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Vsevolod Vishnevsky's play An Optimistic Tragedy, a play in 3 acts, which premiered in 1933. So this is definitely a propaganda piece for the new Soviet government. Vishnevsky, as far as I can tell, was very much a committed communist. He served in, I think, both the Baltic and Black Sea fleets. He enlisted in, I believe, the Baltic fleet. And part of the reason I'm talking about his naval service is An Optimistic Tragedy is set in a naval regiment. So he had enlisted, I believe, in the Baltic fleet prior to the start of World War I. I don't remember how long he was in before World War I, but he participated in the sailors' mutinies that were a big part of the October Revolution, and then he served in the Red Navy in both the Baltic and Black Sea fleets. He was involved in combat in various places. He served as I think, propagandist. He played various roles, etc., etc. He was clearly dedicated to the ideals of communism. And An Optimistic Tragedy fits right into that. It is set during it's set during the early years of the Soviet Union. And it's a very sort of triumphal piece of pro-communist theater. So one of the things I do find really interesting, I'm going to talk about the propaganda aspect in just a second, but I need to start with this because it's the very first thing you encounter. I'm fascinated by dramatists who write stage directions like prose. And what I mean by that is stage directions that give information that is not really performable. And Vishnevsky definitely does this. So the first stage direction, some of this is performable, some of it is not. It says, musical introduction, crescendos of overwhelming strength and sadness, bursts of exaltation that sear the heart and take the breath away, sounds of human endeavor, a mournful cry of what for, a frantic seeking for answers and their discovery. That's more or less performable. The frantic seeking for answers and their discovery is not necessarily a performance cue, but the music, the cries of what for, cool, you can put all that on stage. Then we get this bit. There were 85,000 of us in the Baltic fleet and 40,000 in the Black Sea fleet. We were also looking for answers. Here are 2 of us, and this is how we talk. Unstageable, not relevant information for a director who put this on stage. That might help actors develop the characters, but it isn't something that's stageable, right? The information in terms of how many sailors there were in these fleets makes no difference to how the play is going to be put on. And I find this kind of stage direction fascinating. There's this other one that I think is really, really interesting. The first of the main characters, who's not sort of a narrator, is a Finnish sailor named Vainona. And what it says here, he has his first line. Twilight and not a soul around with a kind word to say to a lonely sailor. And the stage direction not only gives us something unstageable, although it may be useful in terms of how the actor playing Vainona takes that role, it even goes beyond that to prescribe the audience's emotional reaction. Because what Vishnevsky says in this stage direction is, we are moved by his despair, his strange accent, and his eyes in which the tears well up almost without reason, from the sense of the huge brooding silence of the world around him. Cool. If you can get that reaction from one sentence, that's awesome. That's great performance power right there. But as a playwright, you don't really get to prescribe how an audience is going to react to a particular piece of dialogue or a particular performance. So I find that really striking. And who knows, maybe that's sort of the propagandist in Vishnevsky coming out, is this sort of idea of like, this is the proper communist reaction to this sailor's plight, right? Whatever it is, I don't know. But this is very much a propaganda piece, and we start with that sense, right? So the first and second narrators come out, and they are sort of looking out at the crowd, and they're basically like, oh, these are our descendants, even though this is 1933, and the play is set in 1930, or late teens, early 20s, sometime during the Civil War, implicitly before the end of World War I. So, I mean, maybe a generation later, but even that's kind of pushing it. But nonetheless. So at one point, the second narrator says this. What a polite silence. Isn't anyone going to get up and say something? Then addressing the audience, he says, you there, comrade, you seem to be frowning. As much as you say this is a theater, not a recruiting office. As much as to say this is a theater, not a recruiting office. Maybe you think this is a situation where a theater and a recruiting office have different aims. Aha, you don't think so. Well, let's begin then. Like the prelude to a poem. Put aside all your business for tonight. A naval regiment that has done its march now addresses you, our descendants. Stage directions. A huge sheet of armor plating opens slowly with a loud rumble, a scarringly bright day without a single cloud, far too brilliant for a northern eye. Every feature of the terrain stands out with blinding clarity. A regiment is marching along an ancient road. The brightness is intensified by the white uniforms. The regiment troops down onto the stage, forming a gigantic chorus facing the audience. And then the second narrator, once again, who's also the leader of the chorus here, says, each one of these men had a family. Each had a woman. The women loved these men. Many of them had children. They are here, and in each of them are the makings of a future generation. 15 years ago, it was just beginning to show itself. Now it has come into its own. Hello, new generation. These fighting men never wanted you to be sad after their death, and your blood never froze in your veins because several armies were laid low during this great civil war. Life does not die. People can laugh and eat over the graves of their dear ones, and this is all to the good. Cheer up, mate, they would say as death took them. Rouse your spirits, revolution. And now, as I say, the regiment is addressing those who lived after. It releases you of the duty to hold awake for the dead. It proposes that you reflect in silence, that you discover what struggle and death really mean for us. So this is how it began. So again, it is very much a propaganda piece. It is, I mean, the whole idea of like a theater has the same task as a recruiting office is a striking one, in part because it's not entirely wrong, right? To the extent that both of them function as what Louis Althusser would call an ideological state apparatus, that both of them exist and serve the purpose of promoting the Soviet state, promoting conformity to its ideology, encouraging people to serve the state one way or another, whether that's through direct recruitment or by putting on plays that get people to view the Soviet government and society positively, to feel patriotic, etc., right? And so in this sense, this is correct. And then this sort of appeal to the glorious dead of the revolution, the glorious dead who won the Civil War for the Soviets, etc., etc. Again, this is a very standard sort of propagandistic technique in which the martial traditions are sort of pulled together to appeal to sentiments. And we get this, and in which those who have died in the revolution and in the Civil War are sort of ventriloquized as being good, straightforward communists, right? And I don't mean that they weren't. Many of them, I'm sure, were. But I'm equally sure that many of them were ambivalent. Many of them maybe were ideologically wavering. And my guess is that many of the people who died in the Civil War or the Revolution did not die with the thought, great, now my death will be celebrated by those who come after me. I don't really believe that as a sort of practical thing. But again, it serves a propaganda function. And then toward the end of the play, we get another sort of element of propaganda directly stated to the audience. So within the play, basically what happens is you have a ship full of mostly anarchists, some communists, and some, like there's one officer who had been part of the Tsarist Navy, and he's very much more sort of like aristocrat type. So you have a few communists, mostly they're anarchists. And the Soviet government sends a new commissar. The commissar's job basically is to be a political officer, to encourage the sailors to sort of fall in line with Soviet policy, to become Communist Party members, to give up anarchism and embrace Soviet communism, etc., etc. The anarchists are not that keen on this, and there's varying degrees of how not keen they are. But eventually she does sort of win them over and she wins over the anarchists. She and the other communists sort of increase their influence and win over the anarchists through kind of a combination of ideological argument and force. And force ends up being sort of the larger component of it. Combined, and the other big element is a sort of esprit de corps, right? In which the anarchist detachment, which is what it had been known as, is rebranded as a Red Navy regiment. And so the identity changes to a communist-based identity within the Soviet Navy. Authority is asserted, and the anarchists end up sort of mostly giving way. Some of them are very rebellious and are killed for one reason or another, or one of them, a guy named a guy named Croak does end up murdering Vainonen, etc., etc. But basically, they become this coherent fighting unit under the auspices of the Soviet military, and they end up engaged in the final act in this big battle. And a group of them, so basically they split the regiment into two groups, one group going to flank the enemy, one group who's supposed to sort of attack from the front and be a distraction, right? But the enemy shows up and attacks this smaller group that's supposed to be the distraction, and they capture them. And so the second petty officer says, basically to the audience, our comrades are prisoners. The first petty officer says to the audience, what do you think? Is it all up with them? The second petty officer says, and this is where it really gets propagandistic, listen, a fighting communist will go on till his last breath, while he can still move a hand even if it's only his left. And if he can't move, he's still got his tongue. Shout, argue, encourage others to act. If you can't speak, make signs. If they beat you up while they're marching you, don't give in. If you can't stir, if you're bound and gagged, spit out the gag in the face of the executioner. Even as you die, as the axe strikes your neck, give your last thought to the revolution. Remember that that even death can be party work. So again, this is a fairly direct exhortation to the audience that they must be absolutely committed to the cause of communism. They must be absolutely dedicated up to the point of willingly embracing death for the Soviet cause. That's pretty textbook propaganda, right? But also the conclusion of this play is propagandistic, and it's a touching piece of propaganda, but it is a piece of propaganda nonetheless. Because in the final moments, as this group of sailors are rioting in this prison, attempting to escape, and the other detachment of the regiment is coming to save them, the commissar has been taken by the enemy. She's being tortured, beaten, whatever it is. And Alexei, who's kind of the protagonist, he's an anarchist but a free thinker who becomes, he's sort of brought in slowly to the cause of the communists. Basically, Alexei sort of brings he goes and gets the commissar, and he brings her body in after the communists have defeated the enemy, and she's dying. And everybody, there's this sort of like this moment, right, where everybody stands around and they take their hats off and whatever it is, right? And it's this sort of moment of high drama, heightened emotion, with Commissar basically like with her final words. Let me pull up her final words here for just a second. She says her final words, which are, show them what the Navy's made of. And then she dies. And everybody is just overcome with emotion, right? And so again, this idea, this is a very powerful propaganda moment in which this young, attractive agent of the communist state, and got a picture here. This is A. Conan, who played the Commissar in the original 1933 run, right? So you got this young, attractive, dedicated communist who gives her life for the revolution. She literally embodies that injunction to, with your last breath, think of the revolution. Even death can be party work. And it is this moment in which these hardened former anarchist sailors who had these very difficult lives and are very reluctant to accept authority over them, they all sort of stand around, basically weeping at the death of this Communist Party political officer.